The air inside the Galactic Council's chamber was dense with authority, the kind that pressed against the skin like an invisible weight. The circular hall, a grand relic of civilizations long past, bore the insignia of 100 ruling species, their symbols etched into the towering walls. At the center, beneath the glow of suspended starlight, stood the woman. She did not kneel. Chancellor Varric observed her with the cautious detachment of a man who had witnessed the downfall of empires. He was a tall figure, draped in ceremonial silver robes that shimmered with embedded circuitry, his eyes sharp with the intelligence that had kept him at the head of the council for decades. He had interrogated warlords, crushed insurgencies, and dictated the fate of entire planetary systems. Yet, as he regarded the prisoner before him, a quiet unease stirred beneath his confidence. She was unbound, though no restraints were necessary. The containment field around her was calibrated to withstand the strength of a collapsing star, its energy humming in translucent bands of violet and gold. A measure of security, though its necessity was debatable, the woman made no attempt to move beyond it. She merely stood, hands resting at her sides, her expression unreadable. "State your name," Varric commanded, his voice firm, practiced. Silence. The council members, seated in their elevated positions, exchanged glances. The chamber was never truly quiet, holographic displays pulsed with data, the automated scribes whispered as they recorded proceedings, but in that moment, it felt as though all sound had been swallowed. Varric's fingers curled against the cold steel of the podium. "You were found aboard an unauthorized vessel, traveling through restricted space near the event horizon expanse. You did not resist capture. You did not offer identification. And yet, the moment you stepped onto our flagship, our systems faltered." A flicker of movement, the woman's gaze shifted, meeting his. He had expected defiance, perhaps fear, but her eyes held something else entirely. A patience that felt ancient. "Who are you?" The lights above them dimmed for a fraction of a second, a flicker so brief that it might have been overlooked. But Varric noticed. As did the technicians monitoring the chamber's integrity. "Perhaps," the woman said at last, her voice smooth, unhurried, "the better question is, who do you believe I am?" A murmur rippled through the council. Varric exhaled slowly, refusing to be drawn into a rhetorical game. "We deal in facts, not philosophy. You exist outside of any known registry, your DNA does not match any catalogued species, and your presence alone appears to disrupt our systems. That is not a coincidence." The woman tilted her head, the barest hint of curiosity crossing her face. "No, it is not." A sharp tone sounded from the council's data terminals, an alert. One of the analysts, a Zentari with bioluminescent skin, frowned at his console. "Chancellor, our biometric scans are inconsistent. We attempt to lock onto her vitals, but the readings shift. As though she is not entirely here." "Elaborate," Varric ordered. The analyst hesitated. "The results change each time we measure. One moment, she registers as human. The next, something else. Something unclassified." Varric turned back to the woman. "Explain." "I would," she said, "if you were capable of understanding." The lights flickered again. This time, unmistakably. One of the security officers reached for his weapon. Varric shot him a warning glance, and the guard hesitated, fingers tightening around the grip but not drawing. The air had changed, subtle yet undeniable. "Are you a threat to this council?" Varric asked. The woman smiled then, small, almost imperceptible, yet it carried the weight of something vast and unseen. "That depends," she said softly, "on how you define threat." A second alert chimed, this one more urgent. The Zentari analyst's hands moved in a blur across his console. "Chancellor, something is interfering with our planetary defense grid. No external breaches detected, but core systems are failing, reacting as though under attack." Varric's pulse quickened. "From where?" The analyst's voice was laced with confusion. "From inside." All eyes turned to the woman. She had not moved, and yet the very foundation of their stronghold trembled around her. Varric studied her, weighed his next words with the precision of a man who knew how quickly power could shift. The council had conquered warlords, suppressed rebellions, and outlasted cosmic disasters. Yet, in the presence of one unarmed woman, their dominion felt precarious. "You want us to be afraid of you," he said carefully. The woman did not answer. She didn't need to. The quiet certainty in her gaze said enough. Varric straightened. "This council does not bow to intimidation. Whatever you are, whatever anomaly you represent, you will answer for your presence in restricted space." A pause. Then, she stepped forward. The containment field flared. And shattered. A single step, and the entire council chamber plunged into darkness. Panic rippled through the council chamber as the containment field collapsed in a burst of white-hot energy. For a moment, the air itself seemed to bend, warping like heat distortion over desert sands. Then, the chamber was plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from the flickering emergency lights embedded in the walls. Chancellor Varric did not move. Years of command had trained him to suppress reaction, to assess before engaging. Yet even he felt the primal stir of fear, an instinct buried deep within his genetic memory. The woman stood precisely where she had before, her expression unchanged. She had not attacked, had not spoken. And that was what unsettled him the most. The council's security detail, disciplined though they were, reacted less gracefully. Weapons were drawn, the sharp click of priming mechanisms cutting through the silence. A single misfire could ignite catastrophe. "Hold your fire," Varric ordered, his voice steel. The woman turned her gaze to him, and in that moment, the room itself seemed to exhale. The energy in the air, tense as a coiled wire, softened just slightly. Not because she was conceding, but because she willed it. "You misunderstand," she said. Varric kept his stance firm. "Then clarify." A pulse of energy surged through the chamber, not destructive, but vast. It was as if space itself shuddered in response to her presence. The council's data screens flared back to life, their displays flooded with information, though the symbols and sequences were unlike anything their systems should have been capable of processing. One of the council members, a reptilian diplomat from the Hadran Dominion, stared wide-eyed at his console. This is impossible. Our archives are shifting." Varric turned sharply. "Explain." The diplomat's scaled fingers twitched over his screen, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. "Historical records. Star charts. Even genetic databases. It's as if," he hesitated, struggling for the right words. "As if reality is rewriting itself." A murmur spread through the council. The woman remained still. Varric faced her once more. "Who are you?" "You ask the wrong question," she replied, her voice as measured as before. "You seek definitions. Borders. A way to classify what does not belong in your records." A crackle of static burst from the chamber's intercom system, followed by a voice shaken, disoriented. "Chancellor, this is Control. We're receiving multiple reports of temporal instability across the station. Sectors phasing in and out of sync. Sir, our orbit." The transmission cut off. Varric felt the weight of every watching eye upon him. He had ruled this council through the fall of dynasties, had stood unshaken against threats that would have crumbled lesser men. And yet, standing before this woman, he felt small in a way he never had before. "You are not bound by time as we understand it," he said, more a realization than a question. Her expression did not shift, but something in the air did. A subtle acknowledgement. "Then why let yourself be captured?" At this, she smiled, not in amusement, not in arrogance, but in something resembling patience. "You assume I was." Varric's mind raced through the implications. No resistance. No attempt to flee. The anomalies. The shifting records. The fact that she had allowed herself to be taken aboard their station, knowing the limits of their technology. She had chosen to be here. The council chamber trembled again, but this time, it was not from external interference. It came from them, their fear, their uncertainty, their realization that whatever power they held was insignificant against the force before them. A different council member, one of the elder historians, leaned forward. His voice, though worn with age, carried a tremor of reverence. "I have seen these symbols before." He gestured to the shifting displays, his gnarled fingers tracing patterns of light. "In the deepest archives of the Osiric vaults. Warnings. Stories of those who walked outside of time, whose presence was a harbinger of. He hesitated. Change, the woman finished for him. Silence stretched, heavy and absolute. Varric measured his next words with the weight of a man standing on the precipice of something far larger than himself. Are you here to destroy us? A pause. Then, she shook her head. Then why? For the first time, her expression softened. Not with pity, but with something more difficult to define. Because power, she said, is only an illusion until it is confronted by something greater. And with that, she took another step forward. The chamber erupted into light, and the universe shifted. The chamber was no longer as it had been. Where once there had been walls of carved obsidian and luminous data streams, there was now only vastness, a cosmic expanse stretching infinitely in all directions. Stars flickered in the distance, suspended in the endless void like silent witnesses. The council members, once seated in their elevated platforms of authority, now stood untethered, weightless, stripped of the barriers that had once separated them from the unknown. Varric's breath was steady, but his hands curled into fists at his sides. This was not teleportation, not mere trickery. The shift had been seamless, effortless, as if the very fabric of reality had been rewritten around them. The woman stood before them, unchanged, unshaken. But now, the illusion of confinement was gone. She was no prisoner. She never had been. What have you done? Varric demanded. His voice was strong, but he knew the fear in it was undeniable. I have removed the illusion, she replied. Nothing more. The council members exchanged frantic glances, struggling to make sense of their surroundings. Some grasped at empty air as if expecting walls to reappear, as if their minds refused to accept that the chamber was simply no longer there. One of them, a rigidly bureaucratic official from the core systems, found his voice. This is an act of war, he sputtered. You, whatever you are, have violated the sanctity of this council. You have. His words faltered as the woman turned her gaze upon him. Not with anger, not with threat, merely with understanding. He stumbled back, as if the weight of her awareness alone was too much to bear. Varric exhaled. If you wished to destroy us, you would have done so already. The woman inclined her head ever so slightly. Then why show us this? Because, she said, you built your empire on the assumption that you understood the universe. That your dominion was vast. That your rule was absolute. She extended a hand, and as she did, the stars around them shifted. Galaxies spun, unraveling their cosmic threads to reveal something even greater beyond them, something endless, incomprehensible. You are rulers of a fragment, she continued. A sliver of what exists. And yet you act as though you sit upon the throne of all creation. A low murmur passed through the council. Some shook their heads in disbelief, unwilling to accept the scale of what they were seeing. Others simply stared, silent, their arrogance crumbling under the weight of reality. Varric, ever the tactician, forced himself to think beyond the fear. If we are so small, he said carefully, then why bother with us at all? The woman's expression held something almost akin to sorrow. Because even small things, she said, cast long shadows. There was a stillness then, a moment of absolute quiet that stretched across the endless expanse. Then, with a shift so subtle it was almost imperceptible, the council chamber was back. Walls. Floors. Consoles flickering with familiar data streams. The weight of gravity reasserting itself. The illusion, or perhaps the truth, was gone, and yet, nothing felt the same. The council members looked around, some touching their own faces as if to reassure themselves they still existed. Others refused to meet each other's eyes, unable to verbalize the enormity of what had just transpired. Varric's gaze remained locked on the woman. What happens now? You will decide that, she said simply. You have seen beyond yourselves. What you do with that knowledge is no longer my concern. He studied her, searching for deception, for any sign that this was yet another test, another layer of some grand manipulation. But there was none. She had come, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to reveal. A lesson. A warning. Slowly, the woman turned, walking toward the center of the chamber. The air around her shimmered, bending like light over deep water. Varric stepped forward. Will we see you again? She paused, glancing over her shoulder. That depends, she said. On what? On whether you choose to be something worth returning to. And then, she was gone. The chamber remained silent for a long time. No one spoke. No one moved. Finally, Varric exhaled, the weight of the moment settling over him like an ocean tide. The Galactic Council, for all its power, had been humbled. And though the universe itself had not changed, they knew deep in their bones that they had. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence within the chamber did not fade easily. Even as systems recalibrated and the steady hum of technology returned, the weight of what had transpired lingered like an unseen force pressing against the air. Varric stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the space where she had vanished. He had spent his life mastering control of his surroundings, of the council, of the delicate balance that held the galactic order together. And yet, for the first time in his long career, he felt truly powerless. Across the room, council members murmured among themselves, their voices hushed with uncertainty. Some clung to denial, whispering theories of mass hallucination, of some elaborate psychological warfare waged upon them. Others said nothing at all, staring at their hands as if questioning their very existence. One by one, the council's holographic displays resumed their standard operational streams. Diplomatic transmissions, security updates, fleet movements, data that once dictated the course of entire civilizations. But now, in the wake of what they had witnessed, those matters felt impossibly small. A junior official approached Varric cautiously, clearing his throat. "Chancellor, we've received word from the core systems. They're demanding a report on the incident." Varric did not immediately respond. His mind was already moving beyond the question, beyond protocol. The core systems, the outlying colonies, the countless factions and species under their governance, how could he explain what had happened here? How did one put into words the revelation that their dominion was not the vast empire they had believed, but merely a fraction of something infinitely greater? He turned to face the council. "What we say next will shape the course of history," he said, his voice steady despite the storm beneath it. "Do we tell them the truth?" A weighted silence followed. The historian, the one who had recognized the ancient warnings within the woman's presence, leaned forward with his hands clasped. "If we do," he said gravely, "then everything changes. The very foundation of our authority, our right to rule, will be questioned." Varric inclined his head. "Perhaps it should be." A murmur spread through the chamber. Some nodded, slowly accepting what they had long refused to acknowledge, that their power had never been as absolute as they had believed. Others stiffened, unwilling to relinquish control, clinging to the illusion that had governed them for so long. "Fear will spread," one of the core delegates warned. "The people are not ready for this." Varric's gaze hardened. "And do you believe ignorance will protect them?" No one answered. He exhaled. "We have seen what lies beyond our reach. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we are no longer the same council that convened in this chamber hours ago. The question is whether we will act as if we are." The room remained tense, a battlefield of ideology and uncertainty. But Varric saw it now, the shift. The fracture in their certainty. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council did not hold all the answers. Slowly, he turned back to his podium. The decision would not be easy, nor would the path ahead. But one thing was certain. The universe had watched them today. And it would be watching still.